Hey, it's me, Raynard Wilson, for another episode of Mind of Steele, which you may want to know is the regular featurette in which I delve into the thoughts, feelings, and business practices of my best friend in the whole world, Mark Steele. I guess you're wondering why this episode is being recorded from a car and not my usual light blue studio space. Well, it's because today Mark has a few important messages for us.
So we've got some really interesting data coming out about electromagnetic radiation, magnetic fields in particular, and electric vehicles. Guess what? They're pretty dangerous.
Electric vehicles are dangerous. You've heard it here first on the Mind of Steele. And to make things even more dangerous, I'm going to double my risk by sitting in this electric car while watching Mark Steele videos.
They're forcing you into electric vehicles, right, because they're saying they're safe and they're environmentally friendly, which they aren't. Everything they say is just bullshit.
He's absolutely right. Just before I had an urge to go out to the shops and buy 2 litres of milk and some crisps, a man forced me into this electric car and said, "You're not getting out until you make a short feature on how dangerous electric cars are. Otherwise, we're going to kill you," or something like that. It may have been, though, that this man was entirely in my imagination, just like the people who Mark Steele believes might be forcing you into an electric car.
The council's starting to go electric. Police officers are now being put into electric vehicles. That slow can't catch anybody else.
Gosh, what a hilariously comic thought from our friend Mark Steele. Imagine PC Plod gets into his next generation police pursuit vehicle and he floors the accelerator, but instead of going fast as you might expect, it sort of lurches at a walking pace. And onlookers might remark that, wow, this new vehicle is even slower than one of those old milk floats, or perhaps one of those mobility chairs that people with disabilities use. What a hilarious thought, Mark Steele. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
I was talking to a guy the other day. He's got one of these Audis, a hybrid. He went off to Manchester for the day. Now, you've got to remember, he's got a battery, a large electric battery, and an electric motor, and an engine, and petrol, and a tank. So he's got all that extra weight of the battery and the electric motor. He may as well be pulling a trailer, he may as well be pulling a caravan. And that's what he said.
I bet that guy who bought an Audi and drove it all the way from Gateshead to Manchester feels like an absolute chump now. Imagine thinking that you're going to save energy by buying a hybrid vehicle instead of the normal kind of petrol vehicle that we've had on the roads since the 1950s. Well, what a fool.
I mean, those Teslas, the weight of them, I wouldn't like to be run over by one. In fact, I wouldn't like to have a crash with one, because if it bursts into flames, the lithium cobalt runoff is extremely toxic, like setting off a dirty bomb in a city. So
Mark is making a very valid point here. If I'm going to have a crash, I definitely don't want to crash this lovely modern gleaming Tesla and leak cobalt and nickel all over the city like a dirty bomb. No, I want to crash a 1980s American vehicle, and I want it to leak petrol everywhere, and I want, just as I escape from the vehicle, it needs to go up in a giant fireball, just like in all the TV shows I used to watch when I was a kid. That would be so much more satisfying.
So if I get a young driver driving a train or driving one of these electric buses, and all of a sudden he tries to have children, I can prove without much of a problem that, number one, the equipment was uninsurable for harm. Why is these companies putting people in them? Why does Amazon want all these young lads driving around these electric vehicles? I can tell you why. It's called genocide.
One man's genocide is another man's logistics. But I suppose Mark has a point, because I bet Amazon really are trying to kill every single one of their delivery drivers by putting them into an electric vehicle. It makes perfect sense, because if you kill off all of your delivery drivers, you don't have to pay anybody.
See, so if you're a taxi driver, bus driver, see these guys, your employer has to do a risk assessment. Now, they're going to do a risk assessment on something that's uninsurable for harm.
So the company that operates the trains forgot to do a risk assessment on the trains. You've been driving around in an unrisk assessed train drivers, and if you have, Mark Steele can prove that the train was responsible for all the illnesses you've ever felt.
The risk assessment, right, it's really important. So your employer has put you into a device and they haven't carried out any risk assessment, so they're basically on the hook for any claim that you would make in relation to cancer, depression. We've got all the data, by the way, so it's all there.
I'm relieved that Mark Steele has all the data. For a moment, I thought, oh, maybe Mark is making this stuff up. Maybe he's just plucking pseudo-facts out of thin air, imagining things. But no, he's got all the data. Just guys, trust him. He's got all the data. Why do you think he doesn't have the data? Of course he's got the data. Would Mark Steele lie about having the data? He's a kind of guy who goes around, his whole life is about getting the data, responsibly collating it, presenting it, and making a rational argument in front of his scientific peers about data-driven topics. No, he's not a conspiracy. He's not making stuff up. Why would you say that about Mark? He's a responsible scientist. He's not. What? You think he's just angry because he can't afford an electric car? Mark is not like that. Leave Mark alone.
And the fuel energy increases specifically faked, hoaxed, right, so that people can't afford to heat their homes, to get them into electric vehicles, to scam them into an electric vehicle, because basically they're extremely toxic. I warned people before, science is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, the science is straightforward. So all of you who think that Mark Steele is talking a load of twaddle, well, you're just arguing against straightforward science. And if you're not straightforward, then you're probably turning to the left or right a bit, the opposite of being straightforwards. Well, I'm now going to get rid of this electric car. I'm going to crash it into a fence and cobalt and nickel runoff be damned, because I've now realized, thanks to Mark Steele, that this car is responsible for everything that is going wrong in the world. And I don't want to be part of that anymore. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for helping me put the world to right, one step at a time. And maybe, guys, if I haven't died of cancer from sitting inside this electric vehicle for more than the 6 minutes that Mark Steele thinks it's safe, well, I'll join you again in a few more days for another episode of Mind of Steel.